We just finished talking about Camera Raw versus Capture One and how they handle with the raw processing engines. Now let's take a look at how we can modify some of that color. Even though we have a good base, it's important not just to keep it at that, but take it even further with some of the advanced tools. And I think this is where Capture One really excels in some of the ways you can modify color to create cinematic looks and get really in depth with that. Now we're going to section this off into two categories. One's going to be the general color tab, which is going to be the first tab that we adjust things like anything color related. And then we'll have a separate section specifically for advanced color editing, the color editor tool coming up next. So keep that in mind. This is going to go in tandem with each other, and it's very important because it's my favorite tool and the one that I use the most. So we have, like we were in the previous section, some of Amanda Diaz's beautiful images that she happily collaborated us with, and the colors are wonderful in this, and I like this because it gives us the opportunity to explore many colors, and also Stephanie Cotta's images, which are very beautiful in the fact that she uses a lot of emotion in her images, and the colors are soft, very pastel-y. So we have a good contrast of not just subjects, but color tones. So there you have it. I'll start off with using this beautiful back image, which we used in the previous section. And I will go into our color tab here. We already mentioned everything about this section, the library, so you should be quite up to date with how to use this. I'm going to quickly just hide that and get it out of the way, keep everything very nice and neat. I will maximize, go to our color tab, and the color tab, like all tabs in Capture One, are very interesting because there's a shortcut that's hidden, and the first shortcut is going to be this caption here which says command drag to reorder. So if I hold the command key and I click on it, I can drag it over or even get rid of it if I wanted to. But I'm going to keep it there because intuitively color seems to be the first area that we play with, whether it is white balance, whether it is adjusting a cast, tint, etc. The second thing that is really cool about this program is that I can drag and drop, just like Photoshop layers or Photoshop panels or palettes. So if I take my base characteristics here, I can bring it out and bring it to my left side, my right side, and I can stack it, I can remove it, I can delete it, I can hide it, whatever it is that I want. I can remove tool, and it's really customizable. If I right click on the area, I can even add tool and add any specific option into this section. So even if it's not color related, I can customize it to make it my own little section, which is pretty cool. If you don't see some of these tabs here, it's probably because under Window and Workspaces, you might have been using Simplified, which just eliminates a lot of the additional ones like processing, things that you might not always use. So let's go back, Workspace, the RGG Workspace, and we'll go back to our color tab here. Now this ICC profile, this is the actual camera profile that Capture One has developed for this camera. So you want to keep it checked, you don't want to change it to something else. Usually, you don't keep it to generic. You do keep it to generic, you don't keep it to anything else. You can say show all, and what happens is it actually shows you all the cameras that Capture One supports, and even all the Nikon. So you have Nikon profiles here. So if you feel like, hey, you know what, I like Nikon D800 colors. Let's see how it functions based on our 5D. So you can see the colors are more muted. Colors are a little bit different, the way it processes it. I don't really necessarily recommend that. I would just keep it back to what it was before. Let's say you mess up. Let's say you choose like something else, right? You can come up here where you see this little back arrow, and it resets just that section. So you don't have to reset all your settings. You can reset just that section. So that's really cool. Now, this curve, I keep it to auto, but these curves, it, in essence, adds a curve or a contrast or less contrast to the profile developed for the camera. I keep it to auto. I don't adjust anything there to start off with because it's not, I have other features to modify light and luminosity, so I'm not going to tamper with that. Next, we have white balance. White balance by default tends to be preference. I mean, it's up to you, whatever white balance you want. You can do as shot. You even have your typical settings, you know, cloudy, tungsten, whatever. You can even go back to your eyedropper tool. You can click on the specific area you want, and it develops the white balance for you based on what you feel should be neutral. So if you think the roses should be neutral, which it shouldn't, then it puts a green cast over everything because it's pushing everything to green. And that's a little 101 about white balance. So I'll just go back to as shot. The other cool feature you should know is, let's say you decide to change the white balance to, let's amplify this to something stupid because we're not going to actually use this. But if you decide that, let me see temporarily what it would look like if we reset it, I can hold Option and just click on that reset button. And when I let go of my mouse or whatever, it actually just goes back to where your settings were. So you don't have to hit reset and then try and do it again, okay? Or you can hit Command Z to undo and so forth. So let's keep that as is. I don't use the skin tone white balance, and that's just because it tries to develop a white balance based on your skin tone. So if I selected that skin tone, you know, and selected beige, then it adjusted accordingly, which I don't feel like does a good representation personally, but there's a lot of options to play with if you so choose to do so. Now, next part is our color balance. But aside from color balance, we have our histogram up top. Let's not forget that. The histogram over here is really important because it's very dynamic. If I hover over with any tool, let's say I go back to my arrow tool and I hover over, you know, the roses, it tells me what where this is on my histogram. Let's say I'm using a laptop, which I am, and I can't properly see my black levels, my shadows. Where is that information? Well, with this histogram, it tells me where it is in the grand scheme of everything. It's showing me that it's getting close to completely black, but it's not all the way blown out or clipped. The second function is at the top over here. Notice those numbers. Those numbers are so important because if I hover over any part of this image, let's say this red dress, it tells me the color and RGB levels. So I understand what the color preference is for that area without actually knowing what it is. For example, hovering over the red dress. Right now it's reading red 153, green 16, blue 45. What that is telling me is that there's more red, a lot less blue, and even less green. So it's showing me between RGB, what color is it favoring. The same thing goes for skin. You can see the skin is a lot more neutral. You can see the reds at 185, greens at 160, and blues at 140. It's a lot more balanced. And I think skin, personally, shouldn't have a specific number. The reason for that, I say that because based on your environment, based on your white balance, based on the color cast you're getting from the dress, it may change, and it has to be in the context of the situation that you're in. So if you see any numbers if you see any charts that say skin should be this number and RGB, it's not necessarily the case because it's all based on artistic interpretation. It's all based on the environment, what it's shot, and what you see as a creative in your eye. So that's my personal take on it. I know a lot of people go by the numbers, so it's a different scenario, and that's just me. Same thing goes for histogram. I feel like even though this histogram does state that most of the information is past the midtones, it's not an accurate representation of reality because the trees in the background, the tree itself, the bush, whatever it is, it's primarily dark and it's contrasting with the subject. The subject is well lit, it's illuminated, she's standing out. It would be really boring if everything was well lit, even in the background. It wouldn't have that same emotional connection. So you have to consider those things before you begin modifying a lot of those elements. Okay, so moving forward, the next tab is the color balance tab. Now, the color balance tab itself is a very fascinating feature because all versions, or I should say most recent versions, have this tab here, which is called the Master tab. The Master tab is very cool. This is what really got me excited. I, as a creative, am a very visual creative. I don't like numbers so much as I do just physically playing with the colors directly. I like painting, drawing. I like colors. The colors are, what I got into retouching for a lot of the time. And what the Master tab does is whenever I move this middle section here and bring it up, do you see the cast that it's having over the image itself? It's adding warmth in that exact color to the overall image. I'm not even trying to figure out what number it is or what curve do I have to pull down to get to that color. It's specific. I can say, I want more yellow, I drag it there, it's done. It's really simple. It's really simple. The other thing that I could do with this Master tab is I can even change it to magenta. I can add a magenta cast. I don't even need to know white balance numbers. I don't even need to know what a tint is. I don't need to know how they interact with each other. I can just use this as in a sense, a custom white balance. And although it may not be, the reason why this is so impactful is the fact that you can use this specifically for raw files. Why is that really important? Well, raw files contain all the data with color. Just like exposure with raw files, in exposure you can rescue highlights and shadows because you have the raw data there. Well, the raw data also works with color information where you have that expansive array of colors where after you bring it in and export it to a PSD or a 16-bit TIFF, you don't have that full dynamic range within the colors as well. So making use of it here is a very important feature. The question that I get asked a lot is, should you modify colors here or in Photoshop? Well, that depends on how certain you are with what you like. But if you have the ability to do so, getting most of the color through Camera Raw is a very powerful feature. But again, I understand you have clients, you want to go back and forth. So saving catalogs is a good idea because you can save your settings. But also, if you feel like you're going to be retouching a lot, then it might be better to do in Photoshop. But at least this gives you the option to do it. A good compromise is once you're done retouching, you can also import the TIFF file into this program and use the color balance tool to play with colors as your cherry on top, so to speak. So, it gives you a few options, and even though TIFF is not like the raw file where you have all the data, but you still get the advantage of using this tool, and that's the best thing about it, is it works with TIFF files. It works with layered TIFF files as well, but when you export it from here as another TIFF, it's going to flatten it, so keep that in mind. Now, like I mentioned, with this color wheel, you obviously see what's happening. When I move it around, you get a cast which is very nicely done. It's changing everything in a very specific amount and steps that's very beautiful. I mean, you can't not go wrong with experimenting, right? They have other two features. The two other features in this tab specifically are these two wings. I call them wings because they control saturation and they also control luminosity. Let's say that I want to bring down my saturation. I can bring it down here, and it reduces the saturation, not of the image, but of the cast that you applied. So for instance, if I put the full saturation, you see the little dot here goes all the way to yellow, meaning it's adding a full yellow cast over the image. And the other thing, which is really good to notice, is it doesn't look obnoxious. It's not obnoxiously done. It's not just polluting the shadows, not decimating the highlights. It's actually retaining a lot of that natural curve and respecting how black the shadows are and how white the highlights are. It's doing a great job. So it's mostly in the midtones, I guess you can say. So it's desaturating that cast that you added, and you know this because that center dot moves back to the middle. If you want to reset it, just double click and it goes back to the middle. The next feature is luminosity, and it's blanked out right now because you can't add luminosity overall in this section. But in these sections here, you're going to be able to do it. It's going to unlock it. If you're using, say, Capture One above a certain version, like I believe it was 8, I'm not 100% sure which exact one it was, but you have it sectioned off into other tabs as well. For instance, you can control your shadows, midtones, and highlights separately, so that way you're not doing it all at once. You can add specific casts to each area. It's almost like cinema grading. Like you get some very cool looks that you can develop with this. Let's say that you want to adjust it where you have a lot of highlights where they're warm. I can bring up the highlight cast here. I can go into my midtones. I can drop it down and add a little bit of coolness overall to my midtones. Maybe some more like, magentas. And then my shadows, I can quickly add something dynamic and different. Maybe some blues. And there we go. Let's turn this on and off how we learned previously. Option, and there we go. Let's zoom in here. Option, reset. And you see, just like that, you're able to come up with a look that's extremely beautiful and very versatile. And it's working with the raw data. So the colors, the transitions, it's all dynamic, it's all gorgeous. Now that's great. Now also check a look at this. You have the luminosity tab here with the slider. And so what it does is it adds or takes away brightness to that specific area in case you want to rescue particular details. So even the highlights, you can punch it up if you want to, or bring it down. It works very minimally. And your midtones. So there you go. And let me turn this on and off. See how dynamic it is? So that's great. A great feature that I want to talk about when using this specific area here is the ability to actually play with not just color, but black and whites, because Capture One doesn't just give you ability to play with color, but also the black and white feature as well, which is a very fun feature. Let me reset that for a minute. I'll minimize that. Let's open up the black and white tab. So here we go. Now the black and white tab, similarly to Lightroom, and with Lightroom you'll notice in the develop module is over here where you see the HSL color in black and white. But notice that Lightroom does not have specific color wheels. You have to know what color you're changing and specifically how it's doing it accordingly. So you can't do it by midtones, highlights, shadows. It's just color based. So they're really missing that functionality. But they do have a black and white tab. And all those, similar. This is the one that is the most relatable to Lightroom, I say, because the functionality is the same, but the difference is that you're working with colors that are specifically from Capture One, so it's a little different in how it's being processed. So I can tweak the red sliders and adjust luminosity, and it works very similarly, where it finds all the red colors of the image and just luminosity. So if you want to do a black and white conversion where she's standing out a lot more, I can tweak the reds, maybe bring out the yellows, or even bring down the yellows, because I think the yellows are in the grass and in the shade. pop that up. And also notice that the reds are in the roses as well. So I can come up with like really ghostly white, this ghostly white, black and white transition or translation, and make them stand out. You'll notice that when I zoom in here, the blues are also in the hair. And so I can bring that out and really separate everything. It really separates everything. I can go into my split tones and I can add highlights I can add the yellows to my highlights and blues to my shadows. You saw a lot of that, when you see cross-processed black and white looks where they add just a little bit of, coloration between them. I would say the same principle and workflow goes for black and whites. Ultimately, black and whites I keep to the end, but I know that because I have the raw data, I can get a lot more out of converting to the raw converter. So it's a personal preference on what you want to do, but at least you have the functionality to do it. Is there an advantage? The specific advantage being, again, the raw data is what you're taking advantage of through the raw processor. So that's the advantage. I mean, you're not going to be able to pull and push all your dynamic range through a TIFF file or a JPEG or a PSD as much as you can with the raw data, even if it's 16-bit or whatever you're exporting as. So again, that's the biggest takeaway there. One facet that I do want to talk about is, let's say you're doing adjustments, but let's say you want to do a variety of adjustments to one image. What tool do we have to compare different variations? And just like the name says, there's something called variants. And what variants are basically just that, is you can duplicate the image temporarily, apply a setting to that image so you can have a multiple set of images from that same file, so you can do different variations. Let me just show you. I think that would just be better. Let's say I have this image right here. Okay, I am going to right click and go down here and say new variant. If I hit new variant, you'll notice that I have number 1 and number 2. The difference is over here, if I come down to my white balance and quickly just do something, you see number 1 is not affected because number 2 is a variant, which is just a virtual copy. It's not, it doesn't duplicate the raw file. It's not doing any of that. It's just creating like a second bookmark just so that you can play with more options. I can keep doing that over and over again. For instance, if I click on number 2, if I say new variant, what new variant means is it's new, it's clean, it's reset. So if I hit new, it creates number 3. Now, number 2 and number 3 look different because number 3 has no settings applied to it. So let's say you do new variant from anything. It's going to add a variant, but just reset all the settings that you've applied to the one that you're working on. I can also do clone variant. If I do clone variant, what that means is it's going to pick up and copy those settings as well and add it over. So you see, I did a clone variant from number 2, and so the last one just took the settings and made another one. Why do you want to do this? Well, it's simple. Let's say that you have, the second one where you applied the white balance, and you also want to add another thing to it. Let's say you want to add and change the exposure. Or let's say you want to tweak the color balance. Let's do a quick cast of green, right? Let's say you add green. So you've basically done 2 steps. On this one, you've just done your white balance. On this one, you've done your white balance as well as a overall cast. Now, obviously, this is really not something that I would do in real life. It's just a visual example that just keeps an example in mind. But it's almost like you're saving your steps so you can add steps. Say that you have these 4 variants. So how can we consolidate them now? Okay, well, there's a couple of options. Let's say you don't want number 3. I can then click on this and say delete variant. It gets rid of that. So now we have 1, which is our original, 2, and 3. We can even order them. So let's say we want to categorize them. We don't have to use any stars or labels. We can right click and we can say promote variant at the bottom here. And that brings it to number 2. So it's like a race. You're telling it, put that in favor over number 3. And the best part is if you want to export anything, it works as is. So you can go in and then export variant, not original, because original is just going to export the raw file. Variant, okay? So I'm going to delete those. And here we go. I can also demote variant. If I pick variant, what that will do is it puts it to number 1. And then the rest of these will go under that one. But I'll say delete variant, and that's it. Then we have the one that is left over. Then I can reset that. And I undid, so I'll just delete that real quick. There we go. So that is how to play with color. That's how to play with doing different variants. The next section that we're going to get into right now is going to be the color editor tab. So this is going to be its own section because it's going to be really in depth, and this is the tool that is the most used feature and the most needed feature for photographers and retouchers.